I attended your CSA Business and Anesthesia conference, but also one of your talks in Hawaii that actually talked about, progression towards leading in anesthesia. And kind of what we want to do with our platform is to follow up and create just a number of pathways for folks to actually follow and to kind of like find resource in. And, you came up just because I remember your talks, and I kind of want to revisit some of those topics, and I was hoping that you'd be open to kind of sharing your experiences again.
Absolutely, be happy to.
So just to start off, if you wouldn't mind kind of just sharing with us, what drew you to your professional development? Kind of what brought you beyond clinical anesthesia and into your specific area of leadership?
There's two things. One is I've always been interested in teaching and education. And when I was a resident, I enjoyed having the medical student come in and do a central line with me and try to break it down into its component parts. And being able to do it through their hands was an interesting challenge for me. And I would say that my love of learning and in the situations that I've been in and trying to learn more about them and why we do things the way we do them, it was sort of the early path there when I reflect upon it. And just fast forward, after doing a lot of education, CME, many people know I was a pediatric anesthesiologist many years at UCLA, and it's a hospital within a hospital. And those of you who do that in practice, and some of you do adults also, and especially with more out-of-hour anesthesia, you realize when you're running all over the hospital to different places, giving anesthesia in these remote locations, that you see a lot of different things that can be improved. You really see operations in a different way. And so that's what got me sort of started on that path.
So, clearly you have a love of teaching, and that's influenced your decisions, but did that trajectory accelerate at a certain point in your career? And then, is there a right time to actually take this path in towards academic leadership?
So I think we're always doing it. There's always an opportunity. And depending on the program you're in, sometimes it's something you're interested in doing that's available. And sometimes maybe there's just something that's a leadership opportunity that may not be aligned with something that you like to do, but you still can do that thing by learning about how to do a project, how to change an outcome, how to move something beyond, as anesthesiologists, we are really good at figuring things out when there's not a lot of information and then making a decision. And you can actually take some of that same philosophy and apply it to a lot of the project work that people do. And a lot of times people get hung up in making a decision about something. And we're really good at making a decision based on having only some of the information. And so I would encourage people to take on projects where you can move something forward and play with making decisions outside the operating room.
Thank you for that. Now, if someone was to follow in your footsteps, certainly they could probably chat with you about this, but let's just say that you're not available because they're not on staff at Stanford. What do folks do if they're aspiring to kind of look into teaching and looking into academics?
I would say one thing is that you need to look at your own strengths. And so my path, a lot of people say, oh, I like what they did. How do I do what they did to get there? And one thing you learn the more you look into leadership is that everyone has a different style that works for them. And so one thing is to do some reflection on what works for you and what may not work for you, and get feedback from other people. So one thing to do is actually take some people you trust and get some feedback from them. And there's lots of information around you if you're willing to hear that information. And there's even little things you can do. Like if you're running a meeting At the end of it, you could take someone you trust or someone who's there afterwards, or a Zoom meeting, or call them up afterwards, because a lot of stuff we're doing on Zoom, and get feedback about how that went. And that type of, and again, once we're not in, once we're not in training anymore, we really don't get that much feedback at all, right? From anything. We may get negative feedback, but unless you seek feedback or there's a problem, you actually don't necessarily are able to keep learning and adjusting about whatever skill you're trying to develop. So there's lots of people around us, and if you ask them, they're usually willing to share it.
That's fantastic. So in your opinion, now you can kind of look back on your career a little bit. Are there resources that are now available that were not available, as you've been kind of making your career climb?
Absolutely, there's much more available. So there are resources available through the CSA, which are all here, and we're trying to create more of them. The American Society of Anesthesiologists certainly has resources, and they're partnering with ACHE for different courses. You can look to online learning, business schools, things like that. But one of those things is some of them are not geared towards physicians, and there is a benefit to do that because understand the context that you're in. Sometimes it's good to go through a physician cohort, depending on what you want to do. Sometimes it's good to go through a non-physician cohort, depending on what your goal is. So it depends on if your goal is more working on the hospital side with non-anesthesiologists or non-physicians, then there is a certain way and a certain approach that those folks have and a certain language that they use that's important to understand. And so some of that is taking a course and getting a little bit uncomfortable also. Doing something outside, we spend a lot of time in medicine and a lot of time learning our own medical language and our own culture and learning how to be an individual contributor. So there's lots of different ways you can go. One thing is I am part of the ASA committee on professional development, and we are trying to put all the resources in one place that people could look to gain understanding of leadership or mentorship or coaching or to develop themselves as a physician, as a person, in any way you'd like to use that.
I'm glad you touched on the availability of that ASA resource, because I think that, in addition to the Coldan committee via the CSA, what we're trying to kind of create here is a platform, not only as a resource for folks that are in California, but also like throughout the nation, even beyond, just to kind of figure out, allow them to actually find a pathway for themselves and actually provide them with some resources to do that. So I believe you trained at Fuqua and you got a business degree at Duke?
Yeah, so I did my path was later on. So I did my anesthesiology training in Boston, and then was at UCLA for 14 years. And during that time, when I got more interested in operations and had a medical directorship of the OR there, I enrolled in an executive program at Duke. And one of the reasons I chose it was a 1.5-year program. And a lot of the programs are sort of every other weekend, every third weekend. And the Duke program was actually 2 weeks at a time. So I just used conference/vacation time, and my chair, Dr. Kapoor, was very accommodating. And so I actually finished that program in 2013. That was just a regular program, by the way, not a physician-centered program. There were a couple of healthcare people in it. And it was really good because I was completely out of my comfort zone, as I mentioned, and I just learned so much. And that's what also helped get me on the path, was I sort of saw this different world from what I was used to by getting that MBA. Some people get combined MD, MBAs. And one of the challenges, I'd say, is that's really great to have that background before you start your residency in medicine. But there was also something to be said for, I already had my medical experience and training, and now I could start applying what I was doing in the MBA right away. So that's why you really have to adjust the path to your unique situation.
Thank you for those insights. So last question. So if you have any pearls, and I know you've shared quite a few over the last about 10 minutes or so, what would you like to leave your audience with in terms of someone that would like to go in your footsteps, that would like to pursue academic medicine, that would like to help run the ORs at a larger institution?
I would say that when you're seen as a person who solves problems and is working to make things easier for everyone, I think that as anesthesiologists, we're facilitators. We keep the patient safe. We actually facilitate surgery. We facilitate procedures. And so as you are leaning into that, being a facilitator, then you're seen as wanting to be called upon as someone who makes things easy and is helpful. I think sometimes we make the mistake and we end up in this us versus them sort of scenario, with the physicians versus the hospital, or there's tension with the anesthesiologist and the surgeon or the team. And you really see people who are looking at it from a different perspective from that team approach. Now, there are certain things we do have to stand up for making things right for anesthesiology, absolutely. But looking at it in the context of all the other pieces that go into making the interventional space function is a really good start to doing that. And then choosing a small project and being successful. And you'll find that very valuable to contribute.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Thank you for your time. Appreciate you taking some moments out of your busy life to come and speak with us.
It's a lot of fun to give people advice. Sometimes it leads to a deeper, deeper connection, deeper relationship that's ongoing. And those things are two ways. And so I'm perfectly happy for anyone to contact me via email. And if I can help myself, I'm happy to, or I can point you in the right direction. Part of it also is networking and helping each other to progress in what we find valuable.